Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Title IX Insider. We are excited to have Eric Rosenberg join us again from FACE. We're very happy to have you back with us today and would love for you to just quickly introduce yourself again to our audience so that way they can recall who you are. But as a quick reminder to everyone out there, he was on a previous podcast that we did, which was very highly watched. So I definitely recommend everyone go back to watch that specific podcast within this season too. And Eric, feel free to just share a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it. My name is Eric Rosenberg. I'm a lawyer and with the law firm Rosenberg and Ball. We're in Ohio. I'm also on the board for FACE, Families Advocating for Campus Equality, which was part of the reason I was on the last podcast. And I've been doing this work since 2011. Our firm has represented hundreds of students and faculty at both university level disciplinary proceedings, K through 12, as well as litigation. We've filed about over 25 lawsuits across the country.
Amazing. And we are very happy to be partnering with you through these podcasts and collaboration conversations where we know that respondents many times don't get that due process that they definitely deserve and rightfully, have to have under Title IX. And the issues have always kind of been around the fact that institutions are not trained enough. They don't know exactly what they need to be doing to ensure that due process for every party involved in a case. And a lot of that is what you see. So I'm kind of curious if you want to share a little bit about some of the cases you're currently working on, especially when we're dealing with men as respondents.
Yeah, I think so. I see, I'm involved in a case in New York right now. It's a very tragic case of a 15-year-old boy. His name is Owen Poyer. And I could touch on him in throughout this if you'd like me to talk more about that case. It was a very tragic case of a 15-year-old boy who was accused of sexual misconduct on a bus. The school knew or should have known that it just never happened. We can talk a bit about that if you'd like. The way they
Please.
handled the way they
Yeah,
handled
if
the
you can.
proceeding. Okay. Well, let me just. So what happened was, Owen he's 15 and he rides a school bus back and forth between his school and it's what's called CV Tech every day, back and forth with a group that goes from one school to the other. And on that bus are critically people. It's not a lot of kids on the bus, but one of them is his accuser, her friend, and Owen and two of his friends. And what happens is on a Friday, the accuser and her friend file police reports with the state police alleging that Owen had inappropriately touched this girl, the accuser, over her clothes multiple times during that week. 4 days, he's described as engaging in some pretty egregious behavior. And then they tell that to the police. And on Monday morning, Owen is called in he goes to the CV Tech. He's called back in, and he's interrogated by the superintendent at the time. His name was Stan Majeka, and then the assistant principal, her name was Ringer, last name Ringer. So Majeka and Ringer interrogate Owen, and ultimately they tell Owen there is a dispute about whether they said use the word expelled or suspended, but Owen and his family heard expelled. He's going to be expelled after short interrogation. They call his parents. His parents come down to pick him up. And about 2 hours later, when he make an unauthorized access into a gun safe, takes out a gun and kills himself, shoots himself. His father later finds him while he's still alive, and he dies the next day. Now, it's tragic in many ways because it's really a lack of a trauma-informed investigation on this case. We can kind of get into that and pick that apart if you'd like, but it was also a completely avoidable suicide because of a failure to apply the due process rules and laws that are applicable to Title IX at the federal level, as well as New York state law and even their own policies. A complete disregard for that. And I say that in the context of when you're in litigation, I mean, when I'm saying that they admit something, I'm essentially saying that I have documentation that they did that. So it was a very tragic situation, in part because I'll give you a few examples. So before they told Owen, they called him into the office. And by the way, he absolutely denied doing anything when they called him in. And he was crying and he was hysterical. We know this because of the documentation that the school has prepared because of his conduct. And but before they interrogated him, they had met with the accuser, her friend, and their family members, and they had watched a video from the bus on Friday afternoon, the afternoon where the accuser maintains that this was the worst conduct that Owen had engaged in. It was progressively worse up until Friday afternoon. So this bus video would have shown like the worst of the worst, is what they claimed. And that her friend said she saw Owen do A, B, and C. So the police had, the school had information about what the girls were specifically saying happened on the bus. And they had the bus video. And if you watched the bus video in conjunction with their statements, you would have known that, in fact, those things that the girls were saying happened could not have happened because they didn't match what was on the bus video. Now, that's my interpretation of the bus video. But what made it kind of tragic was that both Majeka and Ringer watched that bus video before they disciplined Owen. So they would have known that, or should have known that. Making matters worse is if you watch the bus video, there are two boys who were around these kids the entire time. These two boys saw 90% of the interactions. One of them saw of Owen with the accuser at all times on this bus video. And when the school interviewed these two boys before Owen shot himself, so plenty of time to ask these boys, hey, what do you know about accuser's allegations? Tell me what you saw about, did you see accuser or Owen touch her Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? They never asked a single question, not a single question of these two boys about that incident at all. None. Okay. Now, if they would have, because I sat down with those two boys, I showed them the video, we walked through the statements, and the boys watched all that stuff, and they presented affidavits that said, after watching that they not only did they not see any of the allegations that she says happened on the bus video, but that they never saw the accuser engage in any conduct the entire week before that suggested, in fact, that the boy had done anything that to make her upset. And if you watch the video, you can see that the accuser is not upset by the conduct. In fact, both boys who watched the video said that banter they were engaging in the video, that was just typical of the way they acted. Now, additionally, there's two bus drivers who were actually the bus driver who drove that bus that day actually was involved in a lawsuit against the university, against the school district, where he alleged that his daughter was sexually assaulted and that the school didn't do enough to protect his daughter. That's an ongoing lawsuit. And he said, look, if I would have seen everything, and I'm paraphrasing, but if I would have seen anything that was disconcerting between the Owen and this girl, I would have absolutely said something. I have a lawsuit pending. And so they didn't. So there's tons of this evidence which was never looked at, which is part of this whole idea of treating the respondent as innocent before you take an action, right? Trauma-informed is more than just, I need to appreciate the fact that what I'm doing to Owen may cause trauma enough to make him want to end his life. It's beyond that. It's beyond, before I take a disciplinary proceeding, I need to make sure that I have thoroughly investigated the facts, determine whether, because accusing someone of sexual assault is the worst thing you could do.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So, and making it more tragic in this case was, we have some of the training. So both Majeka and Ringer have acknowledged taking certain training that we give to New York educators about how do you spot suicidal ideation. And they have training, right? I mean, parents aren't trained to, I've got two 25-year-old daughters, right? Nobody ever trained me how to spot suicide ideations in my daughters. I don't know anything about that, but we train educators because they're in these situations. We train them that when you're in situations that these are some things you should look for, right? That you should look, and And in this case, one of the things that Owen said to Ringer after being interrogated was he felt that he knew this happened to the boy who supposedly touched the school bus driver's daughter. I don't want to use his name, but I told about that lawsuit. So what Owen said is, I know what happened to that boy, and I'm done.
Hmm.
That boy never came back to school after he was accused of sexual misconduct. He never came back. He was ostracized by the community. His mother, who was a teacher there, left the school district. His sister never came back. So when Owen is telling a school district, I'm like that guy, I'm done, that's a suicidal ideation, particularly because the training they have has a warning word. Like that warning word is, I'm done, it's over. Those are warning words of suicidal ideations. So when Owen's parents, and there's a lot more than that. I mean, but when Owen's parents come to pick up Owen, they never tell Owen's his parents, hey, your son is engaged. I should step one other big issue I skipped over, which is a big deal for Owen, because Owen was the youngest player on the varsity soccer team for the school, and they were on their way to the state championships. The first game of state championships was a couple of days after he was told he was expelled or suspended, however you want to phrase it. So he felt horrible. He was letting his team down. He was not going to be, and they went on to win championships that year. But so here's a kid, 15 years old, who's being accused of the most heinous thing you could think of. His family, it's a small town. His family owns a business in a small town. If you read the pleadings that I filed with the court, like he would feel like he's let his family down, he's let his businesses down, he's brought so much, but unfortunately, nobody told Owen's parents this.
Yeah, and that's
They would have,
no, it's crazy. When you talk about being trauma informed, you're right. It's not just about can these things impact the individual. We want to be sure that they have counseling. I think many people think that that is what being trauma informed is, and it's so much more than that. One thing that we've been doing is having trauma informed trainings for investigations, trauma informed training for adjudication, the hearings, the advisors, even the Title IX coordinator, because being trauma informed is every step of the way. And what you're describing, yes, it's important for admin to understand the suicidal kind of ideation or a suicidal like touch points where you can identify if they are suicidal or not. But before that, it's being trauma informed in the Title IX process to ensure you're
yeah.
protecting the individual from being completely traumatized to a point of implosion, like what you're describing, suicide, getting a gun. And what does that look like? It would have really started with, like you said, letting the parents know what's going on. That's a big no-no. You'd have to let parents know what's going on. Second, we do something called a notice of process versus simply jumping into the notice of allegation or notice of investigation, where the notice of process would be you call in that respondent to simply let them know something has come up and here is the process. We just want to talk to you about the process and let you know that there will be something coming down the line, the allegation. We're still formulating that, but we want you to know we're not here taking sides. We are going to give you due process. We are going to have this conversation with you and your parents. Parents should probably already be invited at that point as well, at the very beginning. And in order to kind of calm the waters of stress and tension within the Title IX process, because it is completely stressful. It will, in many ways, victimize the student going through that process because it is so abrasive many times during the investigation, during the questioning, just the feeling of being watched, being judged, what's going to happen to me, all the things you're describing. And being trauma informed would have been having that conversation prior to the allegation. And then, even in that allegation, as you said, they hadn't even watched the videos.
Well, they didn't. I think
You know,
it's great that you bring, yeah,
that's crazy.
you bring that up. I mean, one of the real challenges here I found is that the training already exists. In this case, we know there was training, but it's not applied to respondents in the same way it's applied to the complainants. And I have seen that, unfortunately, over and over again. In this case, I appreciate what you say you do, which is very important. But in this case, I'll tell you that when the defendants in this lawsuit questioned Owen, they did it without obtaining Owen's parents' permission. They never provided Owen a written description of the assault allegations. They admit they did not provide Owen or his parents a right to a hearing. They didn't even tell him he had a right to a hearing. He was never told that. They failed to provide Owen or his parents an opportunity to review the bus video. They failed to provide an opportunity to respond to written charges at all. There were lots of additional violations of existing New York federal laws and their own policies that were just never disclosed here.
Right.
And it was tragic because even before, unfortunately, even before Owen was interrogated, they had already told the school, told the accuser, at least the accuser and her parents or her mother, that they were disciplining him, that he was gone. They already knew that they had already implemented the discipline before they even talked to Owen, which is absolutely counter to what should have happened.
Yeah, that's absolutely the opposite of due process. Due process,
opposite.
You go through the process in order to get to a conclusion. You don't have the conclusion before the process has even started.
That's absolutely right. And if his parents would have known any of this, they never would have left him alone for a second until they had a professional help them process what was going on. And it's really challenging at the K through 12 level, because more so than college, because a lot of people are trained to believe that if the principal or superintendent is saying you did something, they're already thinking you did it, right? They think there's already been an investigation. The parents come in, this is obviously, so even that's why there's so many of these due process protections built into the system to do what you just described, which is let's slow this down. Let's let everybody understand what's going down. These are your rights. You're going to have a chance to prove your innocence in a hearing. You can ask questions of your accuser. It's, you can see the evidence that's being presented. Like, just take a deep breath. Everything's going to be okay. You'll have your chance later. When you don't give any of that information to the family or to the accused, they don't think they have any hope. And Owen, unfortunately, is not the only person I'm aware of who's been accused of sexual assault that's ended their life. Right. There's more. And I've taken a handful of suicidal calls over the course of my practice of people who are like, what do I do? And what you have to do is slow down. Now, particularly under the new federal laws. Now, prior to the DeVos rules, this stuff didn't happen. And under the DeVos rules, we're able to slow it down and it's okay. You're going to have your chance. Take a deep breath.
That's true. And before the DeVos rules, I know that you and I had talked about this case a few months back. And before the DeVos rules, I was working with the campus where the student had been accused. This is now a university setting. A student had been accused of some sort of sexual misconduct. They were given, I believe, 30 minutes to an hour to completely remove their belongings from their dorm room, to be escorted away from campus, essentially leaving them homeless. They had nowhere to go. Parents don't live in town. They are not from the area. They're being told all this crazy policy stuff within a document, within an email. Very little resources, no conversation. You're just being accused. Now you're being stripped away from your home, kicked out. Well, he committed suicide. There were absolutely no safeguards to ensuring, is this individual okay, giving him enough time, giving him the process, speaking to the parents, ensuring that he's supported some way, that he knows there's going to be due process. And that's exactly what you're describing. And K through 12, something that you and I have discussed, is even worse than the university settings in many ways.
Yes,
because
I completely agree.
They have a lot less oversight, and the administrators many times are not dealing with Title IX as often as university settings. So when it does happen, it is truly handled so much worse.
Yeah, when you see situations like you described or I'm going through, I mean, nothing's ever going to bring back a life that's lost. And when I first watched that bus video, I mean, my heart is broken. And his Owen's mother hasn't even been able to watch the video. But when his dad watched, I mean, I can't even begin to put myself in their shoes of what they must be feeling as they see this evidence trickling in of why Majeka and Ringer knew or should have known that Owen was innocent,
Mm.
and why you wouldn't have stopped the process to allow him to have his due process rights and tell him, Owen, it's going to be okay. You have these due process rights coming. You have this right to a hearing. He obviously, and Owen had no mental health problems. He has nothing in his that suggests he had any. He was one of the most popular kids in the school.
Mm.
So a tragically a tragic situation that could have easily been avoided by just following the rules. Whether that be the trauma-informed training that they obviously had, or following the due process protections that were in place to protect against this very thing happening. And so we see that. I mean, I currently, luckily, the DeVos rules changed this. Now the world at the university level is if they don't do it right and you tell them, hey, this is a federal rule, you got to do it right, they almost always change track and do it the right way. If you point out that the federal rules give you this right or that right, at the university level, they clearly will do that. Not always at the K through 12 level. I don't know. I don't think the training is near the level it needs to be all around at the K through 12 level.
Yeah, the things that that we're seeing, because we are getting a lot of K through 12 clients at the moment, is many times things are still, for example, right now, everyone should be with the 2020 Title IX regulations. Everyone should be implementing that. We're discovering several K through 12 school districts are still implementing the 2024 regulations that were only in place a few months. Their trainings, they're back from 2016. They do not have updated information. They don't have trainings that are up to date, employees that are up to date. And then there's also confusion. I've always found this between mandatory reporting and then Title IX. Many times they conflate the two. Yes, there are some overlapping areas, but they're not exactly the same. And so that's where we begin to see a big issue within K through 12 a lot of the times too.
Yeah, well, I'm glad for the work you're doing, because it is, I mean, even people who practice in the area, for many of us that do almost nothing but this, figuring out which rule applied for a long time was very difficult, because they were, so if you were kind of part of that early wave where maybe some schools were supposed to, some do. I mean, the early fights over whether the DeVos rules which rules were in place were very confusing. And they could, at the time, sometimes they would vary from state to state. You didn't know what was up. But you're right, now it's the 2020 DeVos rules are what applies. If you're doing anything else, you're wrong.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
and and there needs to be substantial training at especially the K through 12, because, for example, this school, none of those DeVos rules were directly incorporated into their policies. I shouldn't say none, but almost all the key due process protections were not directly indoctrinated into their policies. So, for example, I mean, clearly, Owen had a right to see that bus video, right? Like he would have had a right to see that bus video. It's tragic that Ringer and Majeka saw that bus video and did what they did anyways. But had Owen been able to see that bus video, his parents would have been like, look, it's going to be okay. Because he denied anything. He said, I didn't do anything. I never did anything. Well, if he could have watched the video and say, look, Mom, Dad, I didn't do anything. Right there. Look,
Mm.
Mom and Dad, like the police reports that here says I did A, B, and C, but that couldn't have happened because look, it didn't happen that way. And then he would have had hope. So keep up the good work and trying to make people change.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we're definitely doing that, and with collaborators like yourself, it really is helpful. I know sometimes, as you know, I've already given you a call or two about a case that I'm working on, and I always have some questions because you have such great insight when we're dealing with respondents that most people don't have. A lot of the times, individuals are looking at the complainant side, ensuring that the victims have their trauma-informed rights and their due process and they're not being re-victimized. But folks are forgetting the fact that the same thing is happening on the other side to the respondents. And so Eric has that wonderful perspective and ability to see that by the work that you do. So, kudos to you as well. Continue that good work because due process is important for both sides.
Thank you. It is true. Yeah. I mean, if you apply due process correctly, the truth generally comes out. And that's what we're looking for is the truth. And without due process protections, you're never going to find the truth.
That's right. And I know we said it last time when we recorded together, and your colleague had stated it. We'll say it again here. This does not mean that we're picking sides. This means we want the right side to come out. We want the truth to be found. If the respondent is guilty, is responsible, then definitely Eric agrees. I know that you do with me.
Yeah, I do.
Say they need to have consequences. There need to be sanctions against them. Eric is not here saying that all respondents are innocent. That's not your stance.
No, not at all. I mean, I think I probably should. I used to run an NGO that worked with sex trafficked girls all in Asia and Africa. I have zero tolerance for sexual assault and sexual trafficking. But what I learned is the importance of due process. And if you have proceedings that lack that, you will not get to the truth. And you know, as I mentioned earlier, being accused of a sexual assault is the worst thing that you could be accused. I did prison ministry for over a decade, and there's no one in prison seen lower on the totem pole than a rapist. So, if you're going to accuse someone of rape, you need to give them the ability to defend themselves in a forum that allows them to do that.
That's right. I find it interesting. Sometimes I see in my posts, folks are writing comments such as, not all men, not all men. And, this is kind of like the claim that folks are saying nowadays when I'm talking about due process to ensuring that individuals, if they are responsible for something, that there is a consequence. But folks are kind of like jumping straight to not all men. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on the fact that people try to blanket the protection of all men, versus really looking at, well, if there is a situation, we do want to have due process and get to find out what really did happen.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately in our whole society, it becomes so polarized. You take one side or the other, you can't compromise. And that's the unfortunate thing. I think we've come a long way with the DeVos rules to allow, let's search for the truth versus using stereotypes. However, all stereotypes have their kernels of truth. And, you and I have discussed previously the importance of trying to educate men to better understand what you may or may not be able to do to avoid putting yourself in a situation, because there is not enough, in my views, there never has been enough training of men on how to, appreciate, you leave for college. I mean, this is always the same. It's like Hell Week. Freshmen go to college. That first week, everybody goes out, gets drunk, has sex, and then the Title IX claims start coming in within the next month. And this is very typical year after year. You see that because you get away from home. So kids need to know, okay, when you go to school, these are some things you should do and not do. And it's very common. Well, for a 60-some-year-old guy, it's very who's done hundreds of these cases. I can appreciate how, what I think is just common sense, but it may not be. So it would be nice to see some more training going into training dedicated for men. And if you want to call it respondents trainings, however you want to call it, but the reality is that well over 90, probably 98% of respondents in these cases are men. So you can't just pretend this is a gender blind situation. It is not.
Absolutely. And I shared with you one thing that Title IX Consulting Group is starting to venture into is working and collaborating with the organization HASSL, HASSL. We've done a podcast with them, but we plan to do some work on that to develop some training that is targeting men. That is what HASSL primarily focuses on and does globally. And we want to pull that into the United States through the Title IX side. And I know that I've already tapped on Eric's shoulder, and you're more than happy to join in on that venture as well. Um, and yes, you're right. Typically, respondents are men, and we can't ignore that fact. And many people want to try to kind of cut away from that and not want to stare that in the eye, but I'm not sure why that is.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, and it's been, I think I mentioned to you, I have a lawyer in my firm who she actually started doing kind of informal trainings for boys going off to college in her community. And this is what you do or not do. This is how you treat a woman. This is what you don't do after a date, these kind of things. And people may think that's kind of silly, but it's really not because we see a lot of our cases follow very common fact patterns. And so if you find yourself in this pattern, please don't do A, B, or C. And if you're charged with a Title IX allegation, please call your parents and get a lawyer before you talk to anybody. There's just some simple things. And it's funny because not funny, but there have been a few of the kids who have gone through her class who did not follow our direction, who then had to call us later. And she's like, well, why did you, I told you not to do X. But it would be helpful. I mean, I think there should be training given, to athletes, to male athletes, to fraternities, to places that's really tailored for men in a way that men can appreciate. Because especially a lot of the earlier training modules were clearly, because I saw a lot of them, I've litigated, as I've seen, is that they were really geared towards the woman's side of things.
Mhm.
They were, this is consent. This is what it looks like. This is what you do, and it was always a guy being a bad, it was always the guy being the bad guy. And so there needs to be training on alcohol, drug use, how you one night stands, how you break up. Well, those kind of things need to be explained what you do and don't do.
Absolutely. I think in that training, the trainings at universities and K through 12, I mean, K through 12 doesn't even do that much education, right?
No,
There is no education for K through 12. And many times, even the employees are not getting the appropriate education in K through 12, which is a whole other issue. Same issue that you're describing within that case that you started sharing about. The administration
Mhm.
obviously was not trained well enough to understand what they needed to do, even though you're saying their trauma informed training had been done, was present, but God only knows if they really sat through it the whole time. Did they pass it? Did they not pass it? Were they paying attention? Were they used to it? Had they seen it 5 years in a row so they know exactly what to press just to get through it as fast as they can? That's always a problem. But when we think about men, boys in college who are supposed to be getting online training, let's just say, many times campuses are only relying on the online training, which there again, they're just memorizing what to press. Some
Right.
institutions that I've started working with recently, I mean, I gasped recently because they said to me, "We do have online training." I said, "How long is it?" 10 minutes.
Right. Yeah.
Now, in my opinion, an online training needs to be at a bare minimum 30 minutes long, 45 minutes long, with some quizzes embedded within it. And you should not be doing the same type of test or quiz every year in a row.
Right.
You need to change that up for the students. They cannot be seeing the exact same thing. And you have to scaffold it so that way they're actually learning something. And in addition to that, the schools that are doing it right, the ones that are listening to us, I'm saying also have to supplement the online training. You cannot stop there. What are they going to learn from just watching and looking at a screen and pressing buttons? You have to supplement it with
Yeah.
some in-person training, some creative training, also awareness campaigns. That prevention is so critical. And then I love what you're describing. Target the men, target the boys, have training for them. Don't shy away from the fact that when we have Title IX cases, primarily we're looking at respondents that are boys and men.
And that's a great point. I think it is important to try to tailor things for the audience. So, I mean, one thing I learned from my daughters is that, the way they process information is far different from me. So they're looking for, 30-second, 1 minute kind of, TikTok type of stuff. And that really resonates with them. I don't know if there's a way that, you can do training that comes through emails to the school, like little snippets. And you need to have them because attention is key. It's very hard to hold anyone's. I'm sure someone's turned this off already. Listen to me, like I don't want to hear them anymore. Attention is very difficult to maintain. So especially with a younger audience. To develop things like that are going to be short, going to be really edgy, that's going to get the attention, because these are really important messages, but you're not going to get them with boring, especially, it's not tailored to the audience. Nobody's going to watch them. And if they do, they're going to laugh about it. If they're actually speaking to where they're really thinking, they might change. Because unfortunately, many kids go off to college, even in high school, their views on what intimate relationships look like are just not, they are not the way most people interact intimately. And so there's a real breakdown because no one's teaching them that what they might be, that what it should look like or feel like. And that's we've seen it as a big problem over the years, and it's getting worse.
I know before we started recording today, we were discussing a little bit about sexual ideology and how influences on the media, like such as, pornography within the television systems, are influencing negatively what individuals are thinking sex actually is, what intimacy is. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and what you've seen?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of it, unfortunately. You know, I have come to know the intimate sex lives of a lot of young people because of what we do. So a lot of our cases involve kids who are very early in their sexual experiences. Often virgins or first-time relationships or things like that, and many of them learn. They've grown up looking at pornography, thinking that that's what sex and intimacy looks like, and clearly, that's not what intimacy and sex looks like. And it doesn't make people feel good if you're engaging in things that you might see in pornography. That doesn't make someone leave a relationship feeling fulfilled. So as a result, you need to appreciate. So that message needs to be talked to. And I mean that sincerely, because there was a piece, and don't quote me, I think I told you about The Economist. I think it was The Economist a couple of years ago or a year ago, where there was a boy, I think it was in England, and he had 15 or 16 years old, and he told the surveyors that he was not ready to have sex because he wasn't ready to choke somebody. And because this boy had equated sex to being part of some sort of rough sex that he didn't feel ready to do, so he didn't want to have sex. Something's really wrong when our young people think that this is what sex looks like, and it's a real disconnect. So someone, in my views, needs to have an honest conversation with all sides to appreciate that this is not what intimacy looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's becoming a big problem, and we've seen it over and over again.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that sex education piece, I know in Europe, internationally, they're starting to increase the sex education programming to deter that type of mentality. I know here in the United States, it's such a hurdle to get past within schools, to get some sort of like semblance of sex education, just to have students understand their own bodies, understand how to protect themselves from sexual abuse, and then to actually have that conversation about what is healthy sex, what is normal sex. I know that many parents are always very concerned about that. What are your thoughts on that?
I couldn't agree more. Unfortunately, my daughters had to hear me talk like since they were young. So, Dad, I don't want to hear any more about this stuff. But it is really a problem, and I think that we need to get past the embarrassment factor, because everyone knows what kids are doing on the internet, and you can't just turn a blind eye to thinking that okay, this is just going to be fine if I just ignore it. It has really, I've seen it, it's systemically impacted generations of kids, both boys and girls, who think that, and nobody's stopped to tell them, look, you don't have to do that. I mean, if you're in a relationship, you say no if X is being brought up, both boys and girls.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We were talking, I have a case where it was, actually the boy in a case was, who was a respondent, it was the girl who wanted the boy to engage in rough sex, and he did not want to do it. He told the investigator, I didn't want to do it. I'm not comfortable doing that stuff, but I thought if I didn't do it, she'd leave me. And then later she charged him with engaging in rough sex unwanted when it was him. He passed a polygraph that said it was, hey, she asked me to do these things to her. So it's not just a male issue. This is a male female issue that needs to be addressed honestly. And in the context also of discussing, if you make an allegation of sexual misconduct, what that can do to a person. So please don't, and it's okay, it's okay to say something and then pull it back. Like, unfortunately, over the years, we've seen so many title cases arise because somebody told someone they had a bad date, that the respondent didn't treat them well, and something happened, and then that person tells the RA, well, so-and-so had a bad date, and they did, the respondent did X to them, and then next thing you know, the Title IX office is calling the complainant up and saying, hey, I heard that you, but now it's the telephone line, like now it's, oh, he raped you, and then, oh, well, yeah, he did, and then then they're stuck in a cycle of, but they never wanted it to get there. So mandatory reporting is very important, but it's also important to give the complainants an off-ramp. I have one case right now with the university where I know that the complainant, after receiving the charge letter about what she accused her ex-boyfriend of doing, responded to the university and said, hey, this says I was raped. I wasn't raped. I consented. And they charged him anyways.
Wow.
Right? So that's a great opportunity for the school to say, hey, wait a minute. Okay, if you don't feel this way, let's talk through and make sure that maybe we don't want to bring a charge. But obviously I don't know whether that happened, but that's a tragedy. If somebody tells you, wait a minute, I was involved in a lawsuit where very similar facts happened, where the complainant told the Title IX coordinator and the police chief at the school that when he did what she claimed was a rape, that she was aroused and turned on by it. And they told her, well, if he didn't ask to do it, this is a long-term relationship again, that's rape. If he didn't ask you permission first, it's rape. Okay, well, then he raped me. Well, that's not what she was saying. So, you really have to have more training.
Absolutely. A lot more training, a lot more understanding of what Title IX actually is and that behavior, how it can have that pendulum, that pendulum swing within behavior and those relationships behind closed doors. Many times I've always warned faculty members, do not have a relationship with your students because at the end of the day, even if it was consensual at the beginning and then you upset them later, they want to break it off, you want to break it off, they don't want to break it off, and you do want to break it off. And they come back and they say, he was my professor, this was quid pro quo, or, they forced this situation on me. And
Yep, I've had that case dozens of times. What Joe says, never have any relationship with a student, ever. That's my advice to anyone who's teaching. And I was an adjunct faculty member for 10 years. Never.
yeah, I've seen it so many times. Yeah, and it's exactly how you're describing the relationships too. Even if it's student to student, there's a breakup, someone gets upset, and then they start claiming something, and then something can be misinterpreted by the Title IX office. And, so all of these things can take place. In the perfect world, everyone knows what they're doing, how to do it correctly, and due process will take place. Unfortunately, we are dealing with very imperfect systems and imperfect training, and unfortunately, individuals that many times are not paying attention to what they're being trained on. Um, and so they're implementing things incorrectly, and that's where people get hurt. And that's really what the biggest concern is. I know I'm working with one specific institution where that did take place, and the administrator in charge of Title IX and several processes somehow misinterpreted training information that she was provided by an organization, not our organization, a different organization, but literally was blaming the training for what she was implementing. And I listened. I was doing an audit on this campus, and I said, I know for a fact they did not teach that.
Right.
You're misinterpreting what Title IX is supposed to be doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is concerning too, when
Mm-hmm.
people walk away from trainings and truly are not listening correctly.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we have to remember that they have life-changing impacts because these are young people. And very impersonal people. They think the way I thought at 15 or 18 or 21 is totally different from 30, 40, or 50. And we have to remember that we're dealing with kids who are not, and kids in some of the most traumatic events, like the one you described, where we've had situations like that, where you're off, these are kids, they don't have any money. They were suddenly out of a place to live. They're in a strange state. They don't even have money to get home. And now they got to tell mom and dad, hey, I'm stranded at some, flea bag hotel because I had 20 bucks from friends and I don't even have a way to get home. Well, what happened? I've been accused of sexual assault. What do? Um, you have to have safeguards built in for all parties.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Eric, it's always a pleasure speaking with you.
Yep.
I know that you and I will continue many more conversations after this. Just thank you. Do you have any last tidbits of advice for any respondents out there?
I don't, other than, my only response is that my biggest point of advice is if you're a respondent, please don't talk to anybody until you talk to a professional that can help you better understand the Title IX process, because in Title IX, the truth may not always set you free. You're best to talk to someone that can help guide you through the process before you start talking.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining
Yep,
us
thank you.
today, and we will chat again soon. Everyone out there, please make sure you follow us and like us and leave a comment. We appreciate you, and everyone will see you next time. Bye.